Dr. Amara Richardson stands in the sterile hospital corridor, her hands trembling with barely contained fury as Nurse Linda Hartwell and Dr. Robert Brennan exchange nervous glances near the nurses' station. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting harsh shadows across their faces as security guards hover uncertainly nearby. The pediatric ward's usual bustle has fallen silent. All eyes turn toward the unfolding confrontation. "That's enough," Dr. Richardson says, her voice cutting through the tension like a surgical blade. "You sedated my 3-day-old daughter without medical justification, without parental consent, and against standard protocols." She steps closer, her hospital visitor's badge catching the light. "I want every single person responsible in this room, now." Nurse Hartwell's confident smirk fades as Dr. Richardson continues, "Perhaps you should know exactly who you're dealing with before this goes any further." She reaches into her purse and places a government identification on the counter. "I'm Dr. Amara Richardson, Surgeon General of the United States." The color drains from every face in the hallway. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Now let's rewind to see how this powerful hospital corridor moment came to be, and how one mother's fight for her newborn exposed a system of bias that had been operating in plain sight for years. Dr. Amara Richardson stood at the podium of the National Press Club, her navy blue suit impeccable as she addressed the nation's top health reporters about the new maternal mortality reduction initiative. At 42, she commanded the room with the same quiet authority that had carried her through Harvard Medical School, a residency in emergency medicine, and ultimately to the highest medical position in the United States government. Maternal mortality rates among black women remain 3 times higher than those of white women, she said, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't just a statistic. It's a crisis that demands immediate, systematic intervention." The cameras captured her every word as she outlined the comprehensive program that would revolutionize prenatal and postnatal care across America. Behind the scenes, those who knew Dr. Richardson understood that her passion for maternal health wasn't purely professional. She and her husband Marcus, a successful architect, had struggled with infertility for years before finally conceiving through IVF. The pregnancy had been carefully monitored by the best specialists in Washington, D.C., with every appointment scheduled around her demanding travel schedule as Surgeon General. Marcus often joked that their baby would be born with a security clearance, given how many high-level meetings Amara had attended while pregnant. But beneath his humor lay genuine concern about the stress his wife carried. Leading the nation's public health response during multiple crises while preparing for their first child at 42 had pushed even her remarkable resilience to its limits. "You need to actually take maternity leave," Marcus had told her just days before her due date as they finished setting up the nursery in their Georgetown home. The room was painted in soft yellow, with carefully chosen books lining the shelves and a mobile of tiny airplanes hanging above the crib, a nod to Marcus's love of aviation and Amara's frequent travel. "I'll take time," she had promised, though they both knew her definition of time off rarely aligned with anyone else's. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from the Centers for Disease Control, requests for media interviews, and briefings on emerging health threats. Being Surgeon General meant the nation's health was literally her responsibility, a weight she carried with characteristic determination. The couple had chosen St. Bartholomew Medical Center for the delivery, not because it was the most prestigious hospital in D.C., but because Dr. Elena Martinez, their obstetrician, practiced there and had guided them through the complex fertility journey. Dr. Martinez understood both Amara's medical background and her high-profile position, promising discretion and excellent care. "Your biggest challenge will be letting go of control," Dr. Martinez had told Amara during their final prenatal appointment. "You're used to being the doctor, the decision-maker, the one with all the answers. During labor and delivery, you need to trust us to take care of you." Amara had nodded, understanding intellectually what her doctor meant, but knowing that surrendering control had never been her strength. She'd built her career on preparation, on knowing more than anyone else in the room, on being ready for every contingency. The idea of being vulnerable, of depending on others for her and her baby's well-being, challenged everything she'd trained herself to be. The morning she went into labor, Amara was in her home office reviewing briefing documents about a potential food safety crisis when the first contractions began. True to form, she finished reading the report and sent her response to the CDC before calling Marcus at his downtown office. "It's time," she said simply when he answered. "Now? Are you sure? What about the Surgeon General's conference call at 3? My deputy can handle it. The baby has decided our schedule for us." During the drive to St. Bartholomew, Amara found herself studying the hospital with professional eyes. As Surgeon General, she toured hundreds of medical facilities, evaluating quality metrics, patient safety records, and healthcare equity measures. St. Bartholomew ranked well in national assessments, with particular strength in maternal and pediatric care. The building itself was modern, but not ostentatious, designed to convey competence and calm, rather than intimidate patients with unnecessary grandeur. The maternity ward buzzed with quiet efficiency as they checked in. Dr. Martinez met them personally, her warm smile instantly putting both parents at ease. "Ready to meet your daughter?" she asked, reviewing Amara's chart one final time. "More than ready," Marcus replied, squeezing his wife's hand as another contraction peaked. The labor progressed normally for several hours. Amara found herself impressed by the nursing staff's professionalism and the clean, well-equipped delivery room. Between contractions, she mentally noted the quality of care coordination, the attention to patient comfort, and the respectful communication style of the medical team. Even in the midst of bringing her own child into the world, her professional instincts remained sharp. Baby Zoe Richardson entered the world at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in September, her cry strong and clear as Dr. Martinez placed her on Amara's chest. The moment of first contact overwhelmed both parents with emotion that no amount of professional training had prepared them for. Marcus wiped tears from his eyes as he watched his wife, the woman who advised the president on health policy and commanded global respect, become completely undone by love for their tiny daughter. "She's perfect," Amara whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she studied every detail of Zoe's face. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a head full of dark hair, and eyes that seemed to look directly at her parents with startling alertness. The first 2 days at St. Bartholomew passed smoothly. Amara recovered well from delivery, and Zoe showed all the signs of a healthy newborn. The nursing staff was attentive but respectful of their privacy, understanding that even though Amara was a public figure, these were intimate family moments. A few nurses recognized her, but they maintained professional discretion. Dr. Martinez checked on them regularly, pleased with both mother and baby's progress. "You should be able to go home tomorrow morning," she told them on Wednesday evening. "Zoe's feeding well, your recovery is textbook, and frankly, I think you'll both be more comfortable in your own space." That night, as Marcus slept in the uncomfortable hospital chair and baby Zoe dozed in her bassinet, Amara allowed herself to fully absorb the magnitude of becoming a mother. Her phone sat silent on the bedside table. Her first deputy was handling all but the most critical emergencies, and for perhaps the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about policy initiatives or public health crises. She was simply a new mother, marveling at the tiny person she and Marcus had created, planning quiet mornings at home and wondering what kind of world they were bringing Zoe into. The hospital room felt like a protective bubble, insulated from the pressures and responsibilities waiting outside. Neither she nor Marcus had any reason to suspect that their peaceful family moment was about to be shattered by the kind of medical bias she'd spent her career trying to eliminate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thursday morning arrived with the promise of going home. Dr. Martinez had cleared both Amara and baby Zoe for discharge, and Marcus was already loading their bags into the car when Nurse Linda Hartwell entered their room with an expression that immediately put Amara on alert. After 20 years in medicine, she learned to read subtle shifts in healthcare professionals' demeanor, and something about this nurse's forced smile triggered her instincts. "Good morning, Dr. Richardson," Nurse Hartwell said, her tone overly cheerful in a way that felt performative. "I'm here to do Zoe's final assessment before discharge." She was a woman in her late 40s, with graying hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to appraise rather than care. Her badge indicated 15 years of service at St. Bartholomew, and she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. Amara nodded politely, adjusting Zoe in her arms. The baby had just finished nursing and was contentedly drowsy, her tiny fist curled against Amara's chest. "Of course, Dr. Martinez mentioned someone would do a final check." Nurse Hartwell approached with a clipboard, but her eyes fixed on baby Zoe with an intensity that made Amara unconsciously pull her daughter closer. "She seems quite active for a newborn," the nurse observed, though Zoe was doing nothing more than making soft baby sounds. "She's perfectly normal," Amara replied, confusion creeping into her voice. "All her assessments have been excellent." Nurse Hartwell murmured, making notes that seemed unnecessary given Zoe's peaceful state. "I'm concerned about some behavioral indicators I'm observing. Excessive crying during night shifts, agitation, difficulty settling. These can be signs of neurological issues or substance withdrawal." Amara's medical training kicked in immediately. "Substance withdrawal? What are you suggesting?" "I haven't taken anything stronger than prenatal vitamins during my entire pregnancy. My medical records clearly show—" "Records can be incomplete," Nurse Hartwell interrupted smoothly. "And sometimes mothers aren't entirely honest about their substance use, especially when their careers could be affected." Her gaze lingered meaningfully on Amara's government visitor badge, which identified her as a federal employee but didn't specify her role. The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Are you seriously suggesting that I used drugs during pregnancy?" Amara's voice remained controlled, but steel entered her tone. "I'm a physician. I understand the risks better than most people." Nurse Hartwell's expression shifted to what she probably thought was compassionate, but came across as condescending. "Doctor, I've seen this before. Professional women, especially in high-stress careers, sometimes turn to substances to cope. There's no judgment here, but we have to think about the baby's safety." Marcus, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. My wife has been under constant medical supervision. Every appointment, every test, everything has been documented and normal. Mr. Richardson, I understand you want to protect your wife, but denial doesn't help anyone." Nurse Hartwell's tone grew firmer. "I've been working in this hospital for 15 years, and I can spot the signs. This baby shows classic symptoms of maternal substance exposure." Amara looked down at Zoe, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, showing none of the symptoms the nurse described. "What specific symptoms are you referring to?" "Because I see a perfectly healthy newborn who's feeding well, sleeping normally, and meeting all developmental markers. The crying episodes during night shift were concerning," Nurse Hartwell insisted. "Nurse Mills documented several instances of inconsolable crying between 2 and 4 a.m. That's typical withdrawal behavior." "That's typical newborn behavior," Amara countered, her frustration mounting. "Babies cry. It's literally how they communicate their needs." Nurse Hartwell pulled out a second clipboard. "I'm recommending immediate intervention for the safety of the child. We need to administer a mild sedative to help her through what could be a dangerous withdrawal period, and I'm calling Child Protective Services for a welfare check." The words hit Amara like a thunderbolt. You want to sedate my 3-day-old daughter based on your unfounded suspicions. And call CPS. This is medically inappropriate and completely unnecessary. Dr. Richardson, I understand this is upsetting, but we have protocols to follow when we suspect maternal substance abuse. The safety of the child comes first. Nurse Hartwell's voice took on an authoritative edge that suggested she was accustomed to her decisions being accepted without question. Marcus moved protectively closer to his wife and daughter. We're not consenting to any sedation. This is our child, and you haven't provided any medical justification for this intervention. Actually, sir, when child safety is at risk, parental consent isn't required for emergency interventions, Nurse Hartwell replied smoothly. I have the authority to act in the best interests of the infant. Amara's mind raced through the legal and medical implications. She knew hospital protocols, understood the scope of nursing authority, and recognized that what was happening exceeded any reasonable interpretation of child protection measures. I want to speak with Dr. Martinez immediately, and I want your supervising physician involved in this decision. Dr. Martinez is in surgery, and Dr. Brennan supports my assessment, Nurse Hartwell replied without missing a beat. He's already authorized the intervention. The speed and coordination of this response set off every alarm bell in Amara's professional consciousness. In her experience, medical decisions involving newborns required careful consultation, multiple assessments, and clear documentation of symptoms. What she was witnessing felt less like medical protocol and more like predetermined action based on assumptions rather than evidence. I'm requesting copies of all documentation supporting this decision, Amara said firmly. Every note, every assessment, every consultation that led to this recommendation. Nurse Hartwell's expression hardened slightly. Dr. Richardson, I understand you're upset, but challenging medical authority isn't in your daughter's best interests. Sometimes parents can't see clearly when it comes to their own children. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable now, and Amara realized that her professional credentials and medical knowledge were being dismissed in favor of assumptions about her character and capabilities. The nurse wasn't seeing a fellow healthcare professional or even just a concerned mother. She was seeing something else entirely, and that recognition sent a chill through Amara's core. Nurse Hartwell, I'm telling you clearly that I do not consent to sedating my daughter. I'm requesting immediate consultation with the attending physician and a second opinion from pediatrics. The decision has been made, Nurse Hartwell replied with finality. Nurse Mills is preparing the medication now. This will be easier if you cooperate, but we will proceed regardless. As if summoned, Nurse Patricia Mills entered the room, carrying a small syringe and looking uncomfortable, but determined. She was younger than Hartwell, probably early 30s, with nervous energy that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with what was happening, but felt obligated to follow orders. Please don't make this more difficult than necessary, Nurse Mills said quietly, avoiding direct eye contact with either parent. It's just a mild sedative to help her relax. Amara clutched Zoe tighter, her maternal instincts overriding even her professional training. You are not touching my daughter with that needle. I'm calling security and demanding to speak with hospital administration immediately. Nurse Hartwell stepped closer, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal something harder underneath. Dr. Richardson, you can cooperate now, or we can involve security to ensure compliance. But this intervention is happening for the safety of your child. The threat hung in the air like a challenge, and Amara realized that the peaceful hospital experience she'd trusted was about to become a nightmare that would test everything she thought. She knew about the medical system she'd dedicated her life to serving. What happened next unfolded with a swiftness that left Amara reeling. Before she could fully process the threat, Nurse Hartwell had pressed the call button, summoning security with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, 2 uniformed guards appeared in the doorway, their presence immediately transforming the hospital room from a place of healing into something that felt more like a prison. We have a Situation with non-compliant parents refusing necessary medical intervention for their infant. Nurse Hartwell announced to the guards with clinical detachment. The child requires immediate sedation for her safety, and the parents are becoming aggressive and obstructive. Marcus stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled despite his obvious anger. We are not being aggressive. We're refusing to consent to unnecessary medication for our healthy newborn daughter. The larger security guard, whose name tag read Officer Stevens, looked between the family and the nurses with the weary expression of someone who'd seen similar confrontations before. Folks, hospital policy is clear. When medical staff determine a child's safety is at risk, parents don't get to override that decision. Amara felt a surge of disbelief at how quickly the situation had escalated beyond reason. I'm a physician myself. I understand medical protocols. What you're describing isn't standard procedure for a healthy newborn showing no signs of distress. Nurse Mills stepped forward with the syringe, her hands slightly shaking. If you could just hand over the baby, we can get this done quickly and everyone can go home. Absolutely not, Amara said firmly, shifting Zoe to her other arm, positioning herself protectively. The baby stirred slightly at the movement, but remained peaceful, completely unaware of the crisis surrounding her. Officer Stevens moved closer, his tone becoming more authoritative. Ma'am, you need to comply with medical directives. If you continue to refuse, we'll have to involve Child Protective Services immediately. The mention of CPS sent a chill through both parents. Marcus reached for his phone. I'm calling our lawyer. Sir, put the phone down, the second security guard instructed. No outside communication until this medical emergency is resolved. Medical emergency? Amara's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. Look at my daughter. Does she appear to be in any kind of medical distress? She's sleeping peacefully. Her color is good. Her breathing is normal. There is no emergency here except the one you're creating. Nurse Hartwell consulted her clipboard again, reading from notes that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Patient exhibited signs of neurological irritability at 02:30 hours, inconsolable crying lasting 47 minutes, resistance to feeding, and tremor-like movements in extremities. These are textbook signs of neonatal withdrawal syndrome. Amara stared at the nurse in disbelief. I was awake at 2:30 a.m. Zoe woke up, nursed for 20 minutes and went back to sleep. There was no crying episode, no feeding resistance, and certainly no tremors. Where are you getting this information? Night shift nursing notes are comprehensive and accurate, Nurse Hartwell replied coolly. Nurse Mills witnessed the episode personally. All eyes turned to Nurse Mills, who looked increasingly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. Her mouth opened and closed without words, clearly struggling with something she couldn't quite articulate. Patricia, Nurse Hartwell said sharply, please confirm what you observed during your shift. Nurse Mills fidgeted with the syringe, her eyes darting between her colleague and the family. The baby was crying during night rounds. It was concerning for 47 minutes straight. Amara pressed, her medical training kicking in. And you didn't call for additional assessment during this supposed crisis? You didn't wake the parents? You didn't document vital signs during this distress episode? The question hung in the air, exposing the inconsistencies in their account. Nurse Mills looked down at her feet, unable to maintain eye contact. Dr. Robert Brennan chose that moment to enter the room, his white coat and stethoscope immediately commanding attention. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that typically ended disputes through sheer professional weight. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and supported the nurse's position. Nurse Hartwell immediately deferred to him. Dr. Brennan, we have a newborn showing signs of possible maternal substance exposure. The parents are refusing necessary intervention. Dr. Brennan approached Amara and examined baby Zoe from a distance, not requesting to touch or assess the infant directly. After less than 30 seconds of observation, he nodded gravely. I can see the signs of distress. Sedation is appropriate in this case. Amara felt as though she'd entered an alternate reality where medical professionals were diagnosing conditions that didn't exist and prescribing treatments that weren't needed. Dr. Brennan, I'd like to review the specific medical indicators that support this diagnosis. As a fellow physician, I'm sure you understand my need to see the documentation. Dr. Brennan's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Richardson, being a parent can cloud professional judgment. Sometimes mothers can't see clearly when it comes to their own children, especially when guilt about substance use creates denial. The casual assumption of her guilt, stated as medical fact rather than suspicion, struck Amara like a slap. I have not used any substances during pregnancy. My prenatal records, blood work, and delivery notes all confirm this. I'm requesting immediate consultation with my obstetrician, Dr. Martinez. Dr. Martinez is unavailable, Dr. Brennan replied without checking any schedule or making any calls. As the attending physician, I am authorizing this intervention under emergency protocols. Marcus stepped forward again, his architect's mind seeking logical solutions to an illogical situation. Then we're requesting immediate discharge. If you believe our daughter is in danger in our care, we'll seek a second opinion elsewhere. Discharge is not an option when child safety is at risk, Dr. Brennan stated firmly. The infant will remain under hospital observation until we're confident about her welfare. The words sent a shock through both parents. They were essentially being told that their perfectly healthy daughter was being held against their will based on fabricated symptoms and unsupported accusations. Officer Stevens moved closer to Amara. Ma'am, I need you to hand over the baby now. This has gone on long enough. Amara looked around the room at the faces surrounding her, medical professionals and security. Personnel who seemed united in their determination to take her, a daughter, from her arms and administer unnecessary medication. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt truly frightened, not just angry. I want to file a formal complaint, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I want documentation of every decision being made here, and I want contact information for your patient advocacy department. Nurse Hartwell exchanged a look with Dr. Brennan before responding. Patient advocacy can be contacted during business hours. Right now, we need to focus on your daughter's immediate medical needs. Her immediate medical need is to remain undisturbed in her mother's arms, Amara replied firmly. She is exhibiting no signs of distress whatsoever. Dr. Brennan pulled out his phone and appeared to make a call. Yes, this is Dr. Brennan in maternity. I need CPS emergency response for a potential endangerment situation. Yes, I'll hold. The reality of their situation crystallized in that moment. Within minutes, Child Protective Services would arrive, and Amara and Marcus would find themselves navigating a system designed to protect children but weaponized against parents based on nothing more than prejudiced assumptions and fabricated medical concerns. As they waited in tense silence, baby Zoe continued sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, completely unaware that her first days of life had become the center of a crisis that would expose the darkest elements of a medical system her mother had dedicated her career to serving and protecting. 3 floors above the unfolding crisis in the maternity ward, Dr. Elena Vasquez, Deputy Surgeon General of the United States, was concluding a routine inspection of St. Bartholomew's infectious disease protocols when her secure phone buzzed with an urgent message. The text was from Dr. Richardson's Chief of Staff, unable to reach SG, last known location St. Bartholomew Maternity. Please advise. Dr. Vasquez paused mid-conversation with the hospital's infection control coordinator. Amara was meticulous about communication, especially when on official leave. For her to be unreachable during what should have been a routine hospital discharge raised immediate red flags. Excuse me, Dr. Vasquez said to her escort, pulling out her phone to call Amara directly. The call went straight to voicemail, which was unprecedented. In 15 years of working together, first at Johns Hopkins and later in federal service, Amara had never been unreachable during a crisis. Dr. Vasquez quickly dialed the hospital's main number. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, Deputy Surgeon General. I need to speak with Dr. Amara Richardson immediately. She's a patient in your maternity ward. The operator's response was hesitant. I'm showing that patient is currently unavailable for calls. Would you like me to take a message? Something in the operator's tone triggered Dr. Vasquez's instincts. 25 years in emergency medicine had taught her to recognize when institutional language was being used to obscure rather than inform. Unavailable how? Is there a medical emergency? I'm not authorized to provide patient information to outside parties. I'm not an outside party. I'm Dr. Richardson's deputy and her emergency contact for federal matters. Transfer me to the charge nurse in maternity immediately. After several minutes of transfers and hold music, Nurse Angela Washington picked up the line. Dr. Vasquez recognized the stress in her voice immediately. Dr. Vasquez? Thank goodness you called. Something's happening down here that doesn't feel right. Dr. Richardson and her family are involved in some kind of dispute with nursing staff about sedating her baby. Sedating her baby? For what medical reason? Nurse Washington's voice dropped to a whisper. That's just it. There doesn't seem to be one. The baby looks perfectly healthy to me, but Nurse Hartwell is insisting on intervention. She's got security involved and called CPS. Dr. Richardson has been asking for her phone to call someone, but they won't let her. Dr. Vasquez felt her professional instincts shift into crisis mode. Angela, I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not let anyone administer any medication to that infant without explicit written justification from 2 attending physicians. Do you understand? Yes, but Nurse Hartwell has authority here, and Dr. Brennan supports her decision. No, Dr. Vasquez said firmly. Dr. Richardson is the Surgeon General of the United States. Any medical intervention involving her or her family requires different protocols. I'm coming down there immediately. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. She's... what? Dr. Amara Richardson is the Surgeon General, the highest-ranking medical officer in the United States government. And if what you're describing is happening to her, we have a problem that extends far beyond hospital policy. Meanwhile, in the maternity ward, the situation had reached a breaking point. CPS investigator Sarah Chen had arrived and was conducting interviews with hospital staff, while Amara and Marcus waited under security watch. Baby Zoe had awakened and begun to fuss, normal newborn behavior that Nurse Hartwell immediately pointed to as evidence of distress requiring intervention. As you can see, Nurse Hartwell told the CPS investigator, the infant is clearly agitated. This supports our assessment of possible substance withdrawal. Sarah Chen, a social worker with 10 years of experience, observed the baby carefully. What she saw was a perfectly normal newborn who was hungry and needed a diaper change. Nothing that suggested medical emergency or parental neglect. Mrs. Richardson, she said, I need to ask you directly, have you used any controlled substances during pregnancy or while breastfeeding? No, Amara replied firmly. I can provide complete medical records, blood work results, and urine tests from my entire pregnancy. I'm a physician myself and understand the risks. Chen made notes, clearly uncomfortable with the disconnect between what she was observing and what hospital staff had reported. The baby appears calm and healthy to me. What specific medical indicators support the need for sedation? Dr. Brennan stepped forward with practiced authority. Ms. Chen, medical decisions are outside your area of expertise. We have documented episodes of neurological distress that require immediate intervention. Then I'd like to see that documentation, Chen replied professionally. And I'll need to interview the night shift nurse who supposedly witnessed these episodes. Dr. Vasquez chose that moment to enter the room, her federal credentials clearly visible and her bearing commanding immediate attention. The conversation stopped as she surveyed the scene, a new mother holding her baby while surrounded by security guards, hospital staff holding syringes, and a CPS investigator taking notes. What exactly is happening here? She asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to managing national health crises. Nurse Hartwell looked confused by the new arrival. I'm sorry, but this is a private medical matter. You'll need to... Dr. Elena Vasquez, Deputy Surgeon General of the United States, she interrupted, showing her federal identification. And this is Dr. Amara Richardson, my superior and the Surgeon General. Now someone needs to explain to me why you're threatening to sedate her newborn daughter. The room fell into stunned silence as the revelation sank in. Dr. Brennan's confident expression faltered. Nurse Hartwell's clipboard seemed to tremble in her hands, and even the security guards looked uncertain about their authority in this suddenly elevated situation. Sarah Chen was the first to speak. Surgeon General, I wasn't informed of any special circumstances regarding this family. Dr. Vasquez turned to Amara, her professional mask slipping to show personal concern. Are you and Zoe okay? Has anyone administered anything to either of you? We're fine, Amara replied, relief evident in her voice. But they've been trying to sedate Zoe based on fabricated symptoms and false accusations about substance abuse. Dr. Vasquez turned back to the hospital staff, her expression now deadly serious. I need to see all medical documentation supporting this intervention. Every note, every assessment, every consultation. And I need it now. Dr. Brennan cleared his throat nervously. Dr. Vasquez, I'm sure we can resolve this matter professionally. There may have been some miscommunication about... There's been no miscommunication, Dr. Vasquez interrupted. Either you have legitimate medical grounds for your actions, or you don't. Which is it? The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. What moments before had been a confrontation between isolated parents and institutional authority had become something entirely different. The hospital staff now found themselves facing not just upset parents, but the highest levels of the federal government's medical hierarchy. And Dr. Elena Vasquez was just getting started. Within 30 minutes of Dr. Vasquez's arrival, the atmosphere at St. Bartholomew Medical Center had undergone a complete transformation. What began as a routine hospital discharge had escalated into a federal-level investigation that would expose systemic problems the institution had managed to keep hidden for years. Dr. Vasquez wasted no time establishing command protocols. Her first call was to the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, her second to the Joint Commission on Hospital Accreditation, and her third to St. Bartholomew's Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Richard Kellerman, who arrived within 20 minutes, looking as though he'd been pulled from a board meeting. Dr. Kellerman, Dr. Vasquez said without preamble, I need every piece of documentation related to this incident, all personnel files for the staff involved, and your hospital's policies regarding newborn sedation protocols. I also need your most experienced pediatric hospitalist to conduct an independent assessment of baby Zoe Richardson immediately. Dr. Kellerman, a seasoned administrator who had navigated numerous hospital crises, recognized the gravity of having federal health officials investigating his facility. Of course, Dr. Vasquez, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding that we can resolve quickly. Perhaps, Dr. Vasquez replied coolly. Let's see what the evidence shows. The independent pediatric assessment was conducted by Dr. Lisa Park, the hospital's most senior pediatrician, who had been called in specifically because she had no prior involvement with the Richardson case. After a thorough 30-minute examination of baby Zoe, Dr. Park's findings were unequivocal. This infant shows no signs of neurological distress, withdrawal symptoms, or any medical condition requiring sedation, she reported to the assembled group. Her reflexes are normal, her muscle tone is appropriate, and her behavior is entirely consistent with a healthy 3-day-old newborn. There is no medical justification for the proposed intervention. Dr. Vasquez then turned her attention to the documentation that hospital staff had claimed supported their actions. What she discovered was deeply disturbing. The supposed night shift nursing notes, describing 47 minutes of inconsolable crying, didn't exist in the official medical record. The neurological assessments citing tremors and feeding difficulties were nowhere to be found in Zoe's chart. When pressed, Nurse Mills finally broke under the weight of federal scrutiny. "I didn't witness any extended crying episodes," she admitted quietly, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "Nurse Hartwell told me what to say if anyone asked." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. Dr. Vasquez's expression hardened as she realized they were dealing with fabricated medical evidence rather than misguided professional judgment. Her investigation expanded rapidly. A review of hospital records from the previous year revealed a disturbing pattern. Black and Hispanic mothers were 3 times more likely to have child protective services called during their hospital stays, despite no corresponding increase in actual medical complications. Sedation of newborns from minority families occurred at rates far exceeding medical necessity, often justified by vague references to neurological concerns or behavioral issues. Most damning was the discovery of informal communications between certain nursing staff. Text messages retrieved from hospital phones showed conversations about problem families and difficult demographics that needed extra supervision. 1. Exchange between Nurse Hartwell and Dr. Brennan discussed maintaining standards in the maternity ward and ensuring that certain types of families understood their place in the hospital hierarchy. Dr. Vasquez also uncovered a pattern of complaint suppression. Over the past 3 years, 17 families had filed formal grievances about discriminatory treatment in the maternity ward. All 17 complaints had been dismissed during internal review processes overseen by Dr. Brennan, who classified them as communication misunderstandings or cultural differences in parenting expectations. The scope of systemic bias became clear when Dr. Vasquez examined staffing patterns. Nurse Hartwell and her closest colleagues were consistently assigned to rooms occupied by minority families, while white families typically received care from different nursing staff with markedly different approaches to parent-child interaction and medical decision-making. Sarah Chen, the CPS investigator, provided additional context that strengthened the federal case. "I've received 17 calls from this hospital in the past year requesting child welfare investigations," she reported. 15 of those calls involved families of color, despite the hospital serving a roughly equal demographic mix. The medical justifications were often vague or couldn't be substantiated when I arrived. Dr. Vasquez's team also discovered financial incentives that explained part of the hospital's tolerance for these practices. St. Bartholomew received significant funding from several conservative foundations that explicitly supported traditional family values and had historically opposed equal access healthcare initiatives. Board members from these organizations had expressed private concerns about the hospital serving certain populations that might affect its reputation in affluent communities. The investigation revealed that Nurse Hartwell had been promoted twice in recent years, with performance reviews specifically praising her vigilance in protecting infant welfare and her proactive approach to identifying at-risk families. Dr. Brennan had received similar commendations for his strict adherence to safety protocols in situations involving non-traditional family structures. Meanwhile, nurses like Angela Washington, who had questioned discriminatory practices, found themselves assigned to less desirable shifts and excluded from advancement opportunities. The institutional structure actively rewarded bias while punishing those who challenged. Dr. Vasquez's most significant discovery came when she examined the hospital's relationship with local child welfare services. A troubling pattern emerged, showing that children removed from minority families at St. Bartholomew's recommendation often remained in state custody significantly longer than children from white families, even when presenting similar circumstances. The hospital's assessments carried disproportionate weight in custody decisions, creating a pipeline from maternity ward to foster care system that primarily affected families of color. The federal Investigation also uncovered training materials used in the maternity ward that contained coded language about identifying risk factors in families. While never explicitly mentioning race, the materials described cultural indicators and behavioral patterns that closely aligned with racial stereotypes. New nursing staff were taught to watch for these warning signs and respond with increased scrutiny and intervention. As evidence mounted, Dr. Vasquez realized that what had happened to Dr. Richardson and baby Zoe wasn't an isolated incident of individual bias, but rather the predictable outcome of institutional policies designed to discriminate while maintaining plausible deniability. This isn't about a few bad actors, she explained to Dr. Kellerman as they reviewed the findings. This is about systematic practices that have created a two-tiered system of care based on racial assumptions rather than medical need. The documentation was overwhelming. Fabricated medical records, suppressed complaints, discriminatory staffing patterns, and institutional rewards for biased behavior. The evidence painted a picture of a maternity ward that had operated for years as a mechanism for policing minority families rather than providing equal health care. Dr. Vasquez knew that exposing this system would require more than internal hospital reform. Federal intervention would be necessary to ensure that the changes were real, lasting, and monitored by external oversight. The investigation had revealed problems that demanded justice not just for the Richardson family, but for every family that had been targeted by these discriminatory practices. The hospital's main conference room had been transformed into an impromptu tribunal. Dr. Vasquez had requested that all parties involved in the Richardson incident be present for what she termed a formal review of medical decision-making and protocols. The room's polished mahogany table and professional atmosphere couldn't mask the tension that filled the space as federal investigators, hospital administrators, and the medical staff who had targeted baby Zoe gathered for what would become a career-defining moment for everyone involved. Dr. Amara Richardson sat at one end of the table, baby Zoe sleeping peacefully in her arms, a living contradiction to every claim that had been made about the infant's supposed medical distress. Marcus sat beside his wife, their attorney having arrived an hour earlier to ensure proper documentation of the proceedings. The sight of the healthy, content baby served as a constant reminder of how unfounded the medical interventions had been. Nurse Linda Hartwell entered the room with visible reluctance, her earlier confidence replaced by the nervous energy of someone who knew their actions were about to be scrutinized under an unforgiving spotlight. Dr. Robert Brennan followed close behind, his authoritative bearing intact, but his eyes betraying awareness that his usual institutional protection might not shield him from federal oversight. Dr. Vasquez began with clinical precision. We're here to review the medical decision-making process that led to recommendations for sedating a healthy newborn and involving child protective services based on fabricated symptoms. I want each person involved to explain their actions and the evidence that supported their conclusions. She gestured to a wall-mounted screen displaying baby Zoe's actual medical chart. Let's start with the documented medical evidence. Dr. Park's independent assessment shows normal vital signs, appropriate reflexes, healthy feeding patterns, and no signs of neurological distress. These findings are consistent with every official medical record from baby Zoe's birth through today. The contrast with the alleged symptoms was stark and undeniable. Dr. Vasquez continued, "Now, Nurse Hartwell, please explain the medical observations that led you to recommend sedation." Nurse Hartwell shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The infant exhibited signs of agitation and distress during night shift observations. These symptoms suggested possible complications requiring intervention. According to hospital records, you were not assigned to night shift duty during baby Zoe's stay. Dr. Vasquez replied calmly, How did you personally observe these alleged symptoms? The question hung in the air as Nurse Hartwell realized her fabricated account was collapsing under basic fact-checking. I reviewed the nursing notes from night shift staff. Those notes don't exist in the official medical record, Dr. Vasquez stated flatly. In fact, the night shift nurse assigned to the Richardson family documented normal newborn behavior throughout her stay. So where exactly did you get information about 47 minutes of inconsolable crying? Silence filled the room as Nurse Hartwell's explanation crumbled. Dr. Vasquez turned to Dr. Brennan. Doctor, you supported Nurse Hartwell's assessment and authorized emergency protocols. What specific medical indicators convinced you that sedation was necessary? Dr. Brennan attempted to maintain his professional composure. Based on nursing reports and my clinical observation, the infant appeared to be experiencing neurological distress, consistent with possible substance withdrawal. Your clinical observation lasted less than 30 seconds and involved no physical examination, no vital sign assessment, and no direct interaction with the patient, Dr. Vasquez replied. Is 30 seconds of visual observation standard protocol for diagnosing neurological conditions requiring emergency medication? The question exposed the complete inadequacy of his assessment. Dr. Vasquez pressed further. Additionally, Dr. Richardson provided comprehensive medical records documenting her prenatal care, including blood work and urine tests that clearly showed no substance use. Did you review this documentation before making your diagnosis? Dr. Brennan's face flushed as he admitted the records weren't immediately available. They were available, Dr. Vasquez corrected. Dr. Richardson offered to provide them multiple times. Your staff refused to review them. Why would you proceed with a substance withdrawal diagnosis while actively refusing to examine evidence that could confirm or refute your hypothesis? The systematic dismantling of their medical justifications continued as Dr. Vasquez presented the broader evidence of discrimination. Our investigation revealed 17 similar incidents involving minority families over the past year. In each case, CPS was called based on vague medical concerns that couldn't be substantiated. These families were subjected to extended scrutiny, threatened interventions, and emotional trauma, all without legitimate medical justification. She displayed statistical data showing the dramatic disparities in treatment. Minority families at this hospital are 3 times more likely to have child welfare services called, twice as likely to have their parenting questioned by staff, and significantly more likely to receive recommendations for unnecessary medical interventions. This pattern suggests systematic bias rather than individual medical judgment. Dr. Vasquez then revealed the most damaging evidence, the text messages between hospital staff. Nurse Hartwell, did you send a message to Dr. Brennan 3 weeks ago stating that certain families needed to understand their place in the hospital hierarchy? The message appeared on the screen, its discriminatory language undeniable. Nurse Hartwell's face went pale as her private communications were exposed in the formal setting. And Dr. Brennan, did you respond to that message by expressing concern about maintaining standards when dealing with difficult demographics? Dr. Brennan's professional mask finally slipped as he realized the extent of evidence against him. Those messages were taken out of context. What context justifies discussing hospital patients in terms of demographics that need to understand their place? Dr. Vasquez asked sharply. What context makes it appropriate to describe families seeking medical care as problems to be managed rather than patients to be served? The room fell silent as the discriminatory attitudes driving the medical decisions were laid bare. Dr. Vasquez turned to address the broader institutional failure. Dr. Kellerman, your hospital's complaint review process has dismissed every single grievance filed by minority families over the past 3 years. 17 families reported discriminatory treatment, and 17 families were told their concerns were invalid. How do you explain this perfect record of dismissing minority complaints while taking action on concerns raised by white families? Hospital CEO Dr. Kellerman, who had been hoping to minimize institutional liability, found himself facing evidence of systematic discrimination that couldn't be explained away as isolated incidents. Dr. Vasquez's final confrontation focused on the human impact of these policies. Dr. Richardson, would you like to describe how it felt to have your medical expertise dismissed, your character questioned, and your newborn daughter threatened with unnecessary medication based on fabricated symptoms? Dr. Richardson spoke with controlled emotion. I've spent my career fighting healthcare disparities and working to ensure equal treatment for all patients. To experience this level of bias and discrimination while holding the nation's highest medical office shows how deeply these problems are embedded in our healthcare system. If this can happen to me, with all my advantages and positions, what happens to families without those protections? Her words hung in the room as a challenge to everyone present. The confrontation had systematically dismantled every justification for the discriminatory treatment while exposing the institutional culture that enabled and rewarded such behavior. Dr. Vasquez concluded with a statement that would reshape the hospital's future. This investigation has revealed systematic violations of civil rights, fraudulent medical documentation, and institutional policies that discriminate against minority families. Federal oversight will be implemented immediately, and comprehensive reforms will be required to ensure this never happens again. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were just beginning. Within hours of the formal confrontation, St. Bartholomew Medical Center found itself at the epicenter of a crisis that would fundamentally alter its operations and reputation. The immediate aftermath unfolded with swift precision as federal agencies mobilized to address what had been exposed as systematic civil rights violations in healthcare delivery. Dr. Vasquez's first action was implementing emergency oversight protocols. A federal monitoring team was dispatched to the hospital within 12 hours, armed with authority to review all maternity ward operations, audit patient records, and interview staff members. The Department of Health and Human Services issued a formal notice of investigation, triggering automatic review of the hospital's Medicare and Medicaid funding, financial lifelines that represented over 60% of St. Bartholomew's revenue. Nurse Linda Hartwell and Dr. Robert Brennan were immediately suspended pending full investigation. Their hospital identification badges were deactivated, their access to patient records terminated, and their professional licenses flagged for review by state medical boards. The swift action sent shockwaves through the medical staff, many of whom had never seen such immediate consequences for discriminatory behavior. Dr. Kellerman convened an emergency board meeting as local and national media outlets picked up the story. Federal officials investigate discrimination at prestigious D.C. hospital dominated news cycles, with particular focus on the attempted sedation of the Surgeon General's newborn daughter. The hospital's carefully cultivated reputation for excellence was crumbling in real time as reporters dug deeper into the systematic bias allegations. The legal ramifications began immediately. The Richardson family's attorney filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, not just against the individual staff members, but against the hospital system itself for maintaining policies and practices that violated constitutional protections. Similar lawsuits followed within days, as other families who had experienced discrimination found legal representation and began coming forward with their own stories. Marcus Richardson, speaking to reporters outside the hospital, provided a powerful statement that resonated across social media platforms. This wasn't about my wife's position or our family's resources. This was about a system that saw a black woman with a newborn and immediately assumed the worst. How many other families have faced this same discrimination without the power to fight back? The hospital's attempts at damage control proved ineffective. Dr. Kellerman's initial statement describing the incident as a misunderstanding was quickly undermined as federal investigators released statistical evidence of systematic disparities in treatment. Community leaders who had previously praised St. Bartholomew's commitment to diversity now demanded answers about how such blatant discrimination had operated undetected for years. Nurse Angela Washington, who had been the first to raise concerns about the incident, found herself both vindicated and targeted. While federal investigators praised her willingness to speak truth to power, some hospital colleagues treated her as a traitor who had exposed internal problems to outside scrutiny. The complex dynamics of whistleblowing in healthcare settings became a secondary storyline as medical professionals grappled with their obligations to patients versus institutional loyalty. The financial impact on St. Bartholomew was immediate and severe. 3 major insurance providers announced reviews of their provider agreements with the hospital, potentially limiting patient access and reducing revenue streams. The hospital's bond rating was downgraded as investors worried about the costs of federal oversight and potential legal settlements. Wealthy donors who had supported the hospital's expansion projects began withdrawing funding. Commitments. Dr. Vasquez established a patient advocacy hotline, specifically for families who believed they had experienced discrimination at St. Bartholomew. Within 48 hours, over 200 calls flooded the system. Stories emerged of minority mothers being questioned about drug use without medical justification, families being threatened with CPS involvement for asserting their parental rights, and medical decisions being influenced by racial assumptions rather than clinical evidence. The scope of systemic problems became clear as investigators reviewed historical data. Emergency department records showed that Black and Hispanic patients waited significantly longer for pain medication, were more likely to be questioned about drug-seeking behavior, and received less comprehensive diagnostic workups for similar presenting symptoms. The maternity ward's discriminatory practices were part of a broader institutional culture that treated minority patients as inherently suspicious rather than deserving of equal care. Professional consequences extended beyond the hospital itself. The State Medical Board announced formal investigations into Dr. Brennan's license, examining whether his actions constituted professional misconduct that threatened patient safety. Nurse Hartwell faced similar scrutiny from nursing regulatory authorities, with particular focus on her fabrication of medical documentation, a violation that could result in permanent loss of nursing credentials. The nursing staff found themselves divided into camps. Veteran nurses who had witnessed years of discriminatory treatment but remained silent struggled with guilt about their complicity. Younger staff members expressed shock that such blatant bias had operated openly, while some defensive colleagues insisted that the federal investigation was an overreaction to what they characterized as standard safety protocols. Dr. Lisa Park, the pediatrician who had conducted the independent assessment of baby Zoe, became an unexpected leader in the hospital's reform efforts. Her clear documentation of the infant's healthy status had provided crucial evidence against the fabricated medical claims. She began advocating for mandatory bias training and systematic review of all cases where CPS had been contacted, recognizing that medical professionals had a responsibility to examine their own practices for unconscious prejudice. The community response split along predictable lines. Progressive advocacy groups praised the federal intervention as long overdue accountability for healthcare discrimination. Conservative commentators criticized the investigation as government overreach that would discourage hospitals from making difficult child protection decisions. The polarized reactions reflected broader national tensions about race, healthcare access, and institutional accountability. Most significantly, the Richardson family's experience began, catalyzing conversations about medical bias that extended far beyond St. Bartholomew. Medical schools across the country announced reviews of their curricula to ensure adequate training on unconscious bias and cultural competency. Professional medical organizations issued statements acknowledging that discrimination in healthcare settings was a systemic problem requiring systematic solutions. Dr. Amara Richardson, while still recovering from childbirth and processing the trauma of having her newborn threatened, recognized the broader implications of their experience. "This isn't about one hospital or a few bad actors," she told federal investigators. "This is about examining how racial bias operates in healthcare settings across America and implementing reforms that protect all families, regardless of their background or their ability to fight back." The immediate aftermath had transformed a personal injustice into a national reckoning with healthcare discrimination. Federal oversight would ensure accountability, but lasting change would require the medical community to confront uncomfortable truths about how bias influenced patient care in ways both subtle and devastating. As baby Zoe continued to thrive in her parents' care, completely healthy and requiring no medical intervention whatsoever, her brief hospital stay had exposed systemic problems that demanded comprehensive reform rather than individual accountability alone. 6 months after the federal investigation began, St. Bartholomew Medical Center had undergone a transformation that extended far beyond policy changes and compliance measures. The systematic discrimination that had operated for years had been dismantled and replaced with new structures designed to ensure equitable care for all patients, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. The consent decree, mandated by the Department of Health and Human Services, required comprehensive reforms with measurable outcomes. Every medical decision involving minority families now required documentation of clinical justification, with regular audits to identify potential bias patterns. A new patient equity board, composed of community members and medical professionals, gained authority to review complaints and recommend policy changes. Most importantly, unconscious bias training became mandatory for all staff, with annual recertification. Requirements that linked bias awareness to performance evaluations and advancement opportunities. Dr. Amara Richardson had transformed her personal experience into a national platform for healthcare reform. Working with her deputy, Dr. Vasquez, she launched the National Healthcare Equity Initiative, a comprehensive program to identify and address racial disparities in medical treatment across all federally funded healthcare facilities. The initiative included mandatory data collection on treatment patterns, standardized protocols for pediatric interventions, and whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who reported discriminatory practices. Our daughter's experience taught us that bias in healthcare isn't just about individual prejudice, Dr. Richardson explained during a congressional hearing on medical discrimination. It's about systems that reward assumptions over evidence and institutional cultures that protect discriminatory practices. Real change requires structural reform, not just sensitivity training. The impact at St. Bartholomew was measurable and dramatic. Within 6 months, the disparity in CPS calls between minority and white families had been eliminated. Pain medication wait times showed no racial differences, and patient satisfaction scores among minority families improved significantly. The changes weren't just statistical, they reflected a fundamental shift in how medical professionals approached patient care. Nurse Angela Washington had been promoted to Director of Patient Advocacy, a new position created to ensure that concerns about discriminatory treatment were addressed systematically rather than dismissed. Her office received ongoing federal support and maintained direct reporting relationships with hospital administration and external oversight bodies. The transformation from isolated whistleblower to institutional leader demonstrated how individual courage could create lasting organizational change. The hospital's medical staff underwent significant turnover as federal oversight made discriminatory behavior untenable. Some veteran staff members, unable to adapt to the new standards of equitable care, chose early retirement or transferred to other facilities. Their replacements were selected through reformed hiring processes that prioritize cultural competency and bias awareness alongside medical expertise. Dr. Lisa Park spearheaded the development of new pediatric protocols that emphasized family-centered. Here, an explicit bias checking in medical decision-making. Every intervention involving children now required consultation with multiple medical professionals and clear documentation of clinical indicators. The Zoe Protocol, as staff informally called it, ensured that no child would face unnecessary medical procedures based on assumptions about their family's background. The transformation extended beyond the hospital itself into the broader DC medical community. Other healthcare facilities, recognizing that federal scrutiny could extend to their operations, proactively implemented bias training and equity auditing programs. Medical schools strengthened their curricula on cultural competency and healthcare disparities, using the Richardson case as a teaching example of how unconscious bias could lead to discriminatory medical decisions. Community organizations played a crucial role in sustaining the changes. The DC chapter of the NAACP established a healthcare monitoring program that tracked treatment patterns across local hospitals and advocated for families experiencing discrimination. Community health workers were embedded in hospital settings to serve as patient advocates and cultural liaisons, helping bridge communication gaps between medical staff and minority families. Marcus Richardson used his architecture background to design new patient spaces that promoted family-centered care and cultural sensitivity. The redesigned maternity ward eliminated the institutional atmosphere that had allowed discriminatory practices to flourish, creating environments where families felt welcomed and respected rather than scrutinized and judged. The legal settlements from discrimination lawsuits funded community programs focused on healthcare equity. A new clinic serving underserved populations opened near St. Bartholomew, staffed by medical professionals committed to addressing healthcare disparities. Educational programs in local schools taught families about their rights in medical settings and how to advocate effectively for appropriate care. Baby Zoe, now 6 months old and thriving, had become an unwitting symbol of the fight against medical discrimination. Her parents carefully protected her privacy while using their experience to advocate for systematic change. The healthy, happy infant served as a powerful reminder that the supposed medical emergency that had justified threatening her with sedation had been entirely fabricated. Dr. Richardson established the Zoe Richardson Foundation, dedicated to eliminating racial bias in healthcare settings through research, advocacy, and policy reform. The foundation funded studies examining unconscious bias in medical decision-making and developed training programs for healthcare professionals on recognizing and addressing their own prejudices. The federal monitoring of St. Bartholomew became a model for oversight at other healthcare facilities facing discrimination allegations. The comprehensive approach, combining statistical analysis, community input, and cultural transformation, proved more effective than punitive measures alone in creating lasting change. Professional medical organizations began incorporating the lessons learned from the Richardson case into their ethics guidelines and training standards. The American Medical Association updated its code of ethics to explicitly address unconscious bias, while nursing organizations developed new competency standards requiring demonstration of cultural sensitivity and bias awareness. Most significantly, the case catalyzed broader conversations about systemic racism in healthcare that extended beyond individual incidents to examine structural inequalities. Research funding increased for studies examining racial disparities in medical treatment, while policymakers began addressing systemic factors that perpetuated unequal healthcare access and quality. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some community members resisted changes they perceived as political correctness rather than medical necessity. Budget constraints limited the scope of some reform programs, and changing deeply embedded institutional cultures required ongoing effort and vigilance. However, the measurable improvements in patient care and satisfaction demonstrated that equity and excellence in healthcare were compatible goals rather than competing priorities. St. Bartholomew's quality ratings improved across all demographics, as the focus on bias elimination led to more careful, evidence-based medical decision-making for all patients. As the one-year anniversary of their daughter's birth approached, Dr. Amara and Marcus Richardson reflected on how their family's crisis had sparked a movement for healthcare justice that extended far beyond their personal experience. The systematic discrimination that had threatened their newborn daughter had been exposed and dismantled, but their work continued as they fought to ensure that all families received the respectful, equitable health care that should be every patient's right. 2 years after baby Zoe Richardson's birth at St. Bartholomew Medical Center, the ripple effects of her family's fight against medical discrimination had transformed not just one hospital, but healthcare delivery systems across the United States. What began as a mother's desperate attempt to protect her newborn from unnecessary sedation had evolved into a national movement for healthcare equity that would protect countless families for generations to come. St. Bartholomew Medical Center had become a model for bias-free healthcare delivery. The hospital's transformation was so comprehensive that it now served as a training site for medical professionals from across the country who wanted to learn how to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices in their own institutions. Patient satisfaction scores among minority families had increased by 40%, while overall quality metrics improved across all demographic groups, proving that equity and excellence in healthcare were complementary, rather than competing goals. Dr. Amara Richardson's role as Surgeon General had been profoundly shaped by her personal experience with medical bias. Her National Healthcare Equity Initiative had expanded to cover over 3,000 federally funded healthcare facilities, with mandatory bias training, statistical monitoring, and community oversight becoming standard requirements for federal healthcare funding. The program's success had attracted international attention, with healthcare systems in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia implementing similar reforms. The legislative impact was equally significant. Congress passed the Healthcare Equity and Transparency Act, requiring all hospitals receiving federal funding to collect and report data on treatment disparities and implement corrective measures when bias patterns were identified. The law included whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who reported discriminatory practices and established federal patient advocacy offices in major medical centers. Baby Zoe, now a healthy, energetic toddler, remained unaware of her role in transforming American healthcare. Her parents carefully protected her privacy while ensuring that her story continued to inspire change. The photograph of Dr. Richardson holding her healthy daughter outside St. Bartholomew on the day they finally went home had become an iconic image representing the fight against institutional discrimination. The Zoe Richardson Foundation had funded research revealing the extent of racial bias in healthcare settings that few had previously acknowledged. Studies documented how pain management, diagnostic procedures, and treatment recommendations varied significantly based on patient race, even when controlling for medical conditions and insurance coverage. The Foundation's research provided the evidence base for policy reforms and training programs that addressed unconscious bias in medical decision-making. Nurse Linda Hartwell and Dr. Robert Brennan faced permanent consequences for their discriminatory actions. Hartwell lost her nursing license after an investigation revealed a pattern of biased treatment extending back several years. Dr. Brennan's medical license was suspended for 2 years. and he was required to complete extensive bias training and community service before being eligible for reinstatement. Their cases became teaching examples in medical ethics courses, demonstrating how unconscious bias could lead to professional misconduct and patient harm. The contrast with those who had stood up for justice was stark. Nurse Angela Washington had been promoted to chief patient advocate for the entire hospital system, a position that gave her authority to investigate discrimination complaints and implement systemic reforms. Dr. Lisa Park became Director of Pediatric Ethics, leading efforts to ensure that all medical interventions involving children were based on clinical evidence rather than demographic assumptions. Marcus Richardson had expanded his architectural practice to specialize in designing healthcare facilities that promoted cultural sensitivity and family-centered care. His work influenced hospital design standards nationwide, creating physical spaces that welcomed diverse families rather than intimidating them with institutional authority. The Richardson standards for healthcare facility design became industry benchmarks for promoting equity through environmental psychology. The community transformation extended beyond healthcare into broader conversations about institutional bias and accountability. The Richardson case had demonstrated that individual courage combined with systematic advocacy could create lasting change even in the face of entrenched discrimination. Community organizations across the country use their story as a template for challenging bias in education, criminal justice, and social services. Medical education underwent significant reforms as schools recognized that technical competency alone was insufficient for ethical practice. Cultural competency and bias awareness became required components of medical training, with students learning to recognize how their own assumptions could influence patient care. The Richardson case was studied in medical ethics courses as an example of how unconscious bias could lead to harmful medical decisions despite good intentions. Professional medical organizations strengthened their ethics codes and enforcement mechanisms. The American Medical Association, American Nurses Association, and other professional bodies developed new standards requiring ongoing bias training and cultural competency demonstration for license renewal. Peer review processes were reformed to include bias assessment as a component of quality assurance. The international impact was profound. The World Health Organization cited the Richardson case in developing global guidelines for addressing healthcare discrimination. Countries with universal healthcare systems examined their own practices for similar bias patterns, leading to reforms in the United Kingdom's National Health Service, Canada's provincial health systems, and healthcare delivery in several European nations. Dr. Richardson's continued leadership as Surgeon General was marked by her commitment to ensuring that her daughter's experience would be the last of its kind. Her annual reports to Congress included comprehensive data on healthcare equity progress, holding institutions accountable for eliminating discriminatory practices while celebrating successes in bias reduction. The psychological and emotional healing for the Richardson family had been facilitated by their transformation of personal trauma into public service. While the memory of having their newborn daughter threatened with unnecessary medication remained painful, the knowledge that their fight had protected other families provided meaning and purpose to their struggle. As Zoe approached her second birthday, her parents reflected on the changes her brief hospital stay had catalyzed. The systematic discrimination that had once operated with impunity in healthcare settings was now subject to federal oversight, community monitoring, and professional accountability. Training programs had educated thousands of healthcare workers about unconscious bias, while policy reforms had created structural protections for vulnerable families. The lasting legacy was measured not just in policy changes and compliance metrics, but in the experiences of families who would never face the discrimination that had threatened baby Zoe, young mothers of color, could now enter hospitals with confidence that their parenting would be respected and their children's medical needs would be assessed based on clinical evidence rather than racial assumptions. Dr. Richardson's final reflection captured the transformation's deeper meaning. Zoe's story reminds us that justice isn't achieved through individual protection alone, but through systematic change that protects everyone. Her daughter's brief hospital stay exposed problems that had harmed countless families, but it also demonstrated that institutional discrimination can be overcome when individuals have the courage to speak truth to power and the determination to create lasting change. The fight against healthcare discrimination continued, but the Richardson family's courage had created a foundation for equity that would protect future generations. Baby Zoe's healthy, happy childhood stood as testament to what was possible when medical professionals committed themselves to evidence-based care, free from the corrupting influence of unconscious bias. What would you do if you witnessed discrimination in your community's healthcare system? Would you speak up, even if it meant challenging powerful institutions? This story demonstrates how one family's courage to confront medical bias created ripples of change that protected countless others. If you found inspiration in Dr. Richardson's fight for healthcare equity, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Comment below about your own experiences with healthcare. Have you witnessed bias or discrimination? How did you respond? Share your stories so we can learn from each other and continue building more equitable healthcare systems for everyone. Remember, silence in the face of injustice becomes complicity. Together, we can ensure that every family receives the respectful, evidence-based healthcare they deserve. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.